so grateful to have our special guest tonight.
Yes, a woman of many talents, a woman of many ideas, a woman who's done so much. And individuals did not know or may not know she's an historian as well.
Wow.
So you have here, some people may be wondering, what in the world? It's hot. What is she doing with these quilts, these pieces of quilt?
Here in June,
but this is just a little...
well, the quilt, the real quilt is 109 inches from top to bottom and 86 inches wide, so I thought this was easier to carry around.
Yes, ma'am.
Especially in June.
Yes.
And what does the quilt symbolize?
The quilt, the one that I did, it's called a sampler that represents the 10 codes that were used by slaves during the period of the Underground Railroad. And a lot of people aren't aware that slaves, because they were, in a lot of instances, their languages were different, so they communicated by using quilts. Now, they were taught to do quilts by someone on the plantation called the griot. The griot was a historian. The Africans said that if a griot died, it was synonymous to a library burning down. And so not only did they teach quilting, they taught the history of that plantation. And you know, the slaves generally weren't all of one family, so you wouldn't have the continuing history like we have. So they kept up with it, and they secretly taught the code while they were teaching quilting. And they would only teach it to a few people, because if anyone became aware that the code was being taught, they could be killed, sold, you know,
everybody can't hold water.
Various bad things would have happened to them. And I had heard about it, and so I decided to read the book. And the book is a recount that was told by a woman whose name was Ozella McDaniel Williams. She died before the book was printed. And a woman from Colorado, Jacqueline Tobin, and a Dr. Raymond DeBart, who's a historian, an art history professor at Howard University, collaborated and did the book. And unfortunately, Mrs. Williams died before the book was published. But it's very interesting, and I'm going to come and share the whole long story with Sametta. But I brought some copies of some of the patterns, because they were 10 rather distinct patterns. And they told who, what, when, where, and they even used the ties that the quilts, you know, when a quilt was tied, those things, if you manipulate them because they were tactile, would tell how many miles they were going to travel, lots and lots of things. And it's interesting, you know, for instance, this one would say, get your tools together, because the pattern actually is the monkey wrench, the wrench, the churn dash. But for all practical purposes, it's just a quilt. And this would be the whole pattern and a whole quilt, hung out in a window, on a fence, whatever.
And it would say what again?
It meant get your tools together.
Get your tools together.
But you know, what tools did they have? You know, the few little things, that maybe a hammer, a saw, a screwdriver, an axe, or whatever. And they'd start accumulating tools. And then the next quilt that went out, what would have been this one, which is getting your wagons together. Now, we know slaves didn't own material things like wagons and houses, so theoretically it meant, in terms of a sack that you could put on your back, put those tools that you had gathered and all the things that you could accumulate, no more than what you could carry for, say, 20 miles a day. Because you weren't going back. You knew not to go back. So it was, you know, once you left you had some clothing. Perhaps they had some legumes, peas as it were, a little bit of fat back, a little bit of rice, a little bit of cornmeal, because they were going to make hoe cakes someplace else. And as they traveled, they kept their things in their wagon. And it told where you were going. For instance, they had this one that was called the bear's paw. Well, that looks kind of like the Canadian maple leaf. Well, they were heading to Canada. This was a clue. But it also meant you follow the bear tracks, because the bears ran not only that, but they went parallel to the Appalachian Mountains. And as they came out of the caves, because they only traveled basically when the weather was calm, was warmer, slaves weren't crazy. They traveled when it was warmer. Now, the weather was turbulent, because the masters didn't like to get out in the storms. So and the dogs couldn't follow their tracks. So they would follow, and when in spring the bears had left hibernation, they were out so they could find shelter in the caves. They could also follow the bear tracks and find fruits, vegetables, and things to eat. And if they went far enough, there would be a pass across the mountain, across the Appalachians, west of the Appalachians, heading toward, quote, Canaan, as in I'm bound for Canaan land.
Yes,
and they were ridiculed for, oh, listen to them, they all think they're going to heaven because Canaan was a reference to heaven, but it really wasn't. For them, it meant we are going to Canada. You know, if we can be free, if we can be free. And so I have this whole story.
Wow.
And the quilts, they told a lot of other things. And when Samantha and I can come up with a better time, I'm going to tell the whole story.
I think it's awesome. I think we just need to give our hand right there. Amen. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank God. Thank God.
I've been doing it since 2000. I do it a lot at churches. I've done it at Shepherd, and I did it for Texas Municipal League, and I've done it at a museum at Vernon, and I've done it in Graham. I try to do it within driving distance of Wichita Falls because I don't like to go much, but I do it and I don't charge for it. I just like to do it because it's fun and it's historical, and it's probably as much homage to Mrs. Williams because she died before it could happen. Her nephew said that she had been trying to get somebody to take the story down as she recalled it from her mother, and Mrs. Williams, probably her mother would have been my grandmother's age if they all had lived. Yeah. And so it's kind, you know, you kind of feel that probably I need to do this.
Yeah. Now, Oklahoma City's not too far, is it?
Yeah. You might have to just record this and get it to Oklahoma City. You know, I'm now one of those old ladies who doesn't travel too very much far.
Well, we thank you for coming on here and taking time out of your day, and we know you've had some medical
a little bit of surgery
things
this morning.
Yes, and we truly appreciate you taking time out of your life to come and share life with us. A lot of individuals may not realize, and this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, when I come back and I do the story, you can understand why I'm so enthusiastic about it and why I want to share it. And it might get somebody to read too.
And by all means, I just want you to know how much you just thank God for all that you have done, what you're doing now, and what you shall do. For all, I mean, I've been out of the general community for about 5 years now, but I just can go back and remember all of the wonderful things as a mover and shaker. And here,
I'm still working for the community.
Yeah, well, praise be to God. Praise
be
to God. So thank God for you. So, but I'm gonna be praying that Oklahoma City's not that far. You can drive 75 miles on the interstate. So.
Tell them make a quilt and put some codes on there. Maybe you'll come down.
You know what?
Don't even go there.
You know what? I have a whole lot of my mother. She has a whole lot of quilts that
I collect them. I collect them. I have a quilt that was made before cotton, before synthetics were used. It's all cotton. It's something called a yo-yo. There were little circles that people were making many years ago, and it has over 2,000 yo-yos in it. It's a humongous quilt, and I have one that was done before the country had 50 states, and it's an embroidered quilt that has the 48 replicas of the states. And I try to collect quilts, and I do a little bit. I do them for family members and friends who have children and commemorative quilts.
Well, I got a whole lot of them. Maybe you had to come on up to Oklahoma City to check them out and see what.
Nice try.
Let's give another honorable judge, Arthur B. Williams. Show us some love for being here with us here on the Mission Gospel Train.